Are you afraid of the Great Reset? Well, Jesus is going to reset the Great Reset with something we call the greatest Jubilee. In today's world, the Great Reset is a buzzword for a resetting of the world economies where Klaus Schwab famously tells us, we'll own nothing but be happy. However, no sane person on earth believes this. And fear of this reset is inherent in probably each and every person at some level. If the government owns everything and is in complete charge of the economy, this is by definition a communist takeover of the world. At first, we were told by the complicit media that this was a conspiracy theory. But the World Economic Forum and the world elite are now very upfront that this is their intention, to reset the world. And people naturally fear that. They fear losing everything. They fear the takeover. They fear what this atheistic ruling class will impose on the world. They fear becoming a slave of the system. In the Bible, this coming one world government is known as Mystery Babylon, and it is described in Revelations chapter 17 and 18 as a great political, religious, and economic system. Politically, it's ruled by its merchants, who become the great ones or rulers by deceiving the nations or ethnic groups of the earth. We see this in Revelation 18:23. And it rules over the kings of the earth, as we see in Revelation 17:18. It even initially rules over the beast, as we see in Revelation 17:3. And it will be a cruel master. In Revelation 17:6, it is drunk on the blood of the saints. It is a great killer of Christians and even unbelievers, as we'll learn later in Revelation 18:24. Economically, the merchants enrich themselves with untold wealth that pours into Mystery Babylon. That's described in Revelation 18:11 through 15. That shouldn't be surprising if people own nothing. The rich and the governments will have everything, untold wealth. So, is the wealth equally shared? As we said, hardly. We also learn that this totalitarian system enslaves people. People will be slaves of this system. Religiously, it's described as a harlot, or, what you might call a temple prostitute, with whom the kings of the earth had immoral relations. This harlot is described as wearing the same colors, purple and scarlet, and the same precious jewels as the ephod of the high priest of Israel. What exactly this part means, we are not 100% sure, because the system has not formed yet. However, it's likely it has something to do with the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and maybe even the rebuilding of the temple, where these colors adorned the Holy of Holies and the ephod back in biblical times. Except this time it will be mixed with pagan worship practices. Time is going to tell, however, what this will exactly look like. But in a nutshell, that is where this great reset is heading. This system will be so evil that the beast himself is going to burn its body with fire and take over. And when Jesus returns, the saints in heaven are going to rejoice over its fall. They don't rejoice over the fall of Hitler or Caesar, but they do rejoice over the fall of this horrible system. So except for the world billionaires, the merchants of Mystery Babylon, no one is going to like this system. It is politically, economically, and religiously the most unfair, ruthless, and pagan system ever in history, and it's coming. You can see why people might be afraid. And of course, this will happen. The Bible is very clear. The system is coming into power. And from what we see in our world today, this will happen very soon. However, Jesus has a plan to overcome it with something which we call the greatest Jubilee, or the Messianic Jubilee. Now, a Jubilee is a very poorly understood concept by today's Christians, even though the Jews of the first century, Jesus' time, understood it implicitly. We don't. But it is a symbol of what Jesus is going to do to this horrible system that the Great Reset is going to form. The Jubilee was God's prescription for never allowing a system like Mystery Babylon to form in the first place. But the nations of the world and even Israel don't practice God's prescription anymore. Thus, Mystery Babylon is coming. It's coming because we allowed it to come by not following God's rules and set up for what the world should be. Now, this Jubilee is integral to God's great economic system that He designed for Israel. It is the exact opposite of the Great Reset where you own nothing. It was a time when if you had sold your land to pay your debts, or even if you had sold yourself as a slave so that you could pay your debts, everything would return to the way it was originally. You would get your land back. You would get your freedom back. In the greatest Jubilee, Jesus will set the captives free and take over as a righteous monarch, returning the land to its rightful owners. But if Jubilees were happening every 50 years, as they are supposed to, then the world would never have gotten into the shape it is as it plummets toward a great reset. Every 50 years, the land would revert to the owners, and the mega billionaires and corporations would never form in the first place. If they would have to give back their wealth every 50 years, they could never accumulate the wealth and power they have now. There would be a reset every 50 years, and fairness and justice would reign. So where is this greatest Jubilee, this Messianic Jubilee, found in the Bible? In Daniel chapter 9, for one, in the most famous and probably the most important prophecy, the 70 weeks prophecy. But you'll say, the word Jubilee doesn't even occur in that chapter. And you're right, it doesn't. But the 70 weeks are all about the Jubilee. The word that is found in Daniel 9 is Shabuah. That is the word that tells us about a Jubilee. In fact, 10 Jubilees. We wrote about this, about 6 or 7 years ago in a book we called 70 times 7, where we explained Daniel chapter 9 in great detail. In fact, a whole book of detail. You're always invited to pick up a copy if you like on Amazon if you want more detail than we're giving you here. But if you don't have time for a whole book, let me explain how Daniel 9 explains Jubilees. The word that is found in Daniel 9 is Shabuah, which literally means a 7. This is the Hebrew word that our English Bibles translate as week. The Hebraic plural of a Shabuah is Shabuim, or weeks. In Daniel 9:24, the angel Gabriel told Daniel 70 of these Shabuim, or weeks, were appointed to his people and the holy city Jerusalem. These Shabuim, now they're sevens, right? Could be sets of 7 days, which is a week of days, or they could be 7 years, a week of years. In Leviticus 25, this was prescribed for the ancient Israelites. When you come into the land which I give you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. Notice the word Sabbath. The 7th day. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard, and gather its fruit. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard. Leviticus 25, 2-5. So just like a week of days has a Sabbath, a week of years does as well. A Sabbath year when the land would not be sowed or reaped, and when the Israelites would have to depend on God for provision. It is exactly these type of weeks that Daniel 9 was talking about, and every Hebrew reading this in Daniel's day or in Jesus' day 500 years later would instinctively understand this. The Shabuah was like our decade of 10 years, except theirs was only 7 years long. So just as God told them that there were 70 weeks coming, or Shabuah, if God told us there were 70 decades appointed for us, we'd understand exactly what he meant. And in the same way, the Hebrews understood that Shabuim of Daniel 9:24 were sets of 7 years. And the Shabuim, or weeks, were organized into sets of 7 of these Shabuah, or weeks, which were then a Jubilee cycle of 49 years. And you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years. And the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be 49 years. See, just like we said. Then you shall cause the trumpet of Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the day of atonement. You shall make the trumpet to sound throughout your land, and you shall consecrate the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his possession, see, get his land back, and each of you shall return to his family. See, have freedom, be freed from slavery. That's Leviticus 25, 9 through 10. After each of these jubilee cycles of 49 years, there would be a jubilee year. When everyone would return to his possession, he would get his land back and return to his family. He'd get his freedom back if he had sold himself into slavery, just like we said. This was the Jubilee as God prescribed it. Now, the angel Gabriel told Daniel the prophet that 70 of these weeks, or Shabuim, were appointed. After every 7 of these, of course, was going to come a Jubilee. That's what God said. Count off 7, and then have a Jubilee. So divide 70 by 7, and you'll find that there were 10 Jubilee cycles appointed by God. It was implied in what was being said. Every Israelite would understand that. And this is critical understanding for every Christian to know today. And look what Gabriel told Daniel next. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks. 7 weeks. That's a Jubilee cycle. And 62 weeks. Notice how the first section of time is broken up into 7 weeks or 49 years. As we said, this is a single Jubilee cycle. This confirms that Gabriel was talking about Jubilees. 10 of them, 10 Jubilees. If each year is a box on this graphic on the screen, 7 years would look like this. Notice how we made the final box green in color. That means it's a special year. Those were the sabbatical or Sabbath years when the land was not supposed to be sowed or reaped. If we organize 7 of these weeks of years into a graphic, it would look like this. This is a Jubilee cycle. God commanded Israel to count off 7 weeks or Shabuim before celebrating a Jubilee. And notice, each of the final years of each week is different. There are 7 Sabbath years in a Jubilee cycle. And then, of course, the next year is going to be a Jubilee. In the first century, during the days of Jesus, one of the most popular books available was the Book of Jubilees, or also called Little Genesis. It is not part of the canon of Scripture and likely not inspired, and there are likely errors in it. There may be some truth, there may be some error. However, the Jews of that day knew this book inside and out. It's even quoted by the early church fathers in the centuries after Jesus' resurrection. It was a well-respected book. That's the important part. And in that book, they told us when they celebrated the Jubilee. They did not end a Jubilee cycle of 7 weeks, insert a Jubilee year like this, and then start another cycle of 7 years. Rather, it is obvious from this book of Hebraic history that they made the first year of every new cycle to be the Jubilee year, just like this. This is still the 50th year. It just isn't crammed in and inserted between 2 Jubilee cycles. It becomes part of a Jubilee cycle, the first year of each Jubilee cycle. So, Jubilee cycles are not 50 years as many think. Historically, they cannot be. They are rather 49 years long, and a continuous flow of weeks of years occurs just like a continuous flow of weeks of days continues from creation until now. This book could be wrong, this book of Jubilees, could be wrong about a lot of things, but it couldn't be wrong about how the Hebrews celebrated a Jubilee, or like when they celebrated it. Daniel's 70 weeks then would look like this: 10 Jubilee cycles with 10 Jubilees marked in yellow. And guess what comes after the 70 weeks are done? You're right, a Jubilee. This is the Messianic Jubilee, the greatest Jubilee, when Jesus returns the land to its original owners and frees the captives who've been made slaves. Jesus undoes or crushes the Great Reset, where you shall own nothing, and he gives everything back to the original owners. So when you're fearing the Great Reset, you should be looking forward to the greatest Jubilee, because that undoes it all. Did the ancient Israelites understand this? Yes, they did. Amazingly, in the Dead Sea Scrolls is something known as the Melchizedek Pesher. They wrote about Daniel's 70 weeks as Jubilee cycles. This document is also known as, get ready, 11Q13, meaning it was the 13th document found in the 11th cave at Qumran. Here is what it says. And concerning that which he said, in this year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his property, and likewise, and this is the manner of release, every creditor shall release that which he has lent to his neighbor, and shall not exact it of his neighbor and his brother, for God's release has been proclaimed. Deuteronomy 25:2. And it will be proclaimed at the end of days concerning the captives, as he said to proclaim liberty to the captives, Isaiah 61:1. Notice that in this document, from like 200 years before Christ, the ancient Hebrews were teaching the same thing we are in this video. But what about the 10 Jubilee cycles of Daniel 9? Look at what this document, the Melchizedek Pesher, continues to say. And the Day of Atonement is the end of the 10th Jubilee. There it is right there. When all the sons of light and the men of the lot of Melchizedek will be atoned for. And the Day of Atonement is the end of the 10th Jubilee. There it is right there. That's what this whole thing is about, Daniel 9. When the sons of light and the men of the lot of Melchizedek will be atoned for. There it is, plain as day, 10 Jubilee cycles followed by the greatest Jubilee, the Messianic Jubilee, when Jesus sets the captives free and returns possessions to their original owners, when he undoes the Great Reset with the greatest reset of his own. So we have figured out how the Jubilee figures into all of this. But what about those Sabbath years? If you notice, Jesus the Messiah comes after a Sabbath year, according to Daniel 9:26. That comes the first time. So obviously, they have a very significant role to play. For instance, the last year of the 70th week of Daniel is also a Sabbath year. Do you notice that? Don't you find that interesting? Well, click right here to keep watching, to discover the amazing things that are going to happen in that final Sabbath year of the 70th week of Daniel, because the Bible tells us. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.